When Americans think of Muslims, they might identify with the Nation of Islam.
You wanted some action then, didn't you? Because you don't like the idea of white people shooting black people down, do you?
Or media portrayals of Arabs as terrorists and extremists. But what many do not know is the fascinating history of Muslims in the Western Hemisphere. In fact, there were stories of those who came from Africa and practiced their religion long before Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492. Ancient manuscripts from West African Muslim scholars give clear testimony of voyages to the West and the arrival of America's first Muslim settlement. In the time that followed, a chain of events would unfold that would forever change the world's religious landscape. For 7 centuries, countless African, Asian, and Middle Eastern Muslims would arrive in America, some by force, others by choice. Over the years, their evolution would become legendary, the impact of which has already been felt around the world. Now, as we enter the 8th century of America's relationship with Muslims, things have never been more complicated. Conflicts in Palestine, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the 9/11 attacks on New York have created a great divide among many Americans. Attitudes from the past have begun to resurface. But times have changed. Today, there are nearly 10 million Muslims living in America. Prepare yourself for a journey that will examine this history and the people who dared to live out this great American story of 8 centuries of Muslims in America. Islam came to Africa during the 7th century, and its initial spread was part of the single most cultural change in the history of the world. The word that an Ethiopian sat at the side of the prophet of the new religion traveled fast. Bilal ibn Rabah became a familiar revolutionary figure and the most celebrated African in Islamic history. When the Muslims entered Mecca in triumph in 630 AD, Bilal made the first call to prayer from atop the new mosque. As caravans of Arab merchants crossed the Sahara to trade during the first Islamic centuries, they brought stories of Bilal's devotion to the faith and of other African Muslims who were active in the movement. Centers of commerce paved the way for the new religion and provided the first places of worship as traders began to have prayer areas in the towns. Islam was accepted as early as 850 AD in the Senegal, Ghana, and Mali region, which became the starting point for Arab and West African relations under the banner of Islam. Arab historians began to write about West Africa, a place they referred to as Bilad al-Tikur, land of the black Muslims. Abdullah al-Bakri, a Muslim geographer, gives an early account of Islam in West Africa during the 11th century. In his book of Roads and Kingdoms, he said it was a prosperous area, and the Muslim ministers were learned enough to record events in Arabic and corresponded with other Islamic states. Beyond religion, Islam brought a common language and writing systems that were molded into formal education institutions. The works of Muslim scholars were preserved for many centuries by written manuscripts. Some of these scholars had made tremendous strides in laying many of the foundations for modern science. One school that prospered while collecting these manuscripts of knowledge was in the West African city of Timbuktu. Built as a mosque in 989 AD, Sankore University became the African continent's greatest center of learning and perhaps the finest university in the world during the 14th through 16th centuries. The massive number of documents rivaled those anywhere in the world. Books from social scientists like Ibn Khaldun and mapmakers like Muhammad Ali Idrisi were considered as valuable as gold. Scholars were held in the highest esteem, and students numbered in the tens of thousands.
That's when Islam went into a golden age. Scholars and students came from all over the Muslim world into Black Africa. A point of reference is the case of Abdurrahman al-Tamimi, who was from the family of the Prophet. He was from the Sharif family of Mecca. And there were so many Sudanese students coming into Mecca to study there, and he fell in love with these here Africans. So he said, listen, I'm going to go to Timbuktu to help these brothers out. When he arrived in Timbuktu in the 13th century, he thought he was going to teach. He went into the Sankore University, and in that university was a black scholar by the name of Modibo Muhammad Kaburi. When he sat in the scholarship, he saw not only was he not qualified to teach in this university, he was not even qualified as a student. So he left Timbuktu and went back to the Karawane, North Africa, and studied for 12 years, and he came back and became Modibo Muhammad Kaburi's chief student, and he then inherited the deanship of that university after Modibo Muhammad Kaburi.
In 1324, the ruler of Mali, Mansa Musa, was en route to Mecca in Arabia when he informed the governor of Cairo, Egypt, that his predecessor had taken a voyage across the Atlantic. The story was confirmed when Shihab ad-Din al-Umari, a 14th century Egyptian geographer, reported the astonishing story of Abu Bakr II, Mali's voyager king, who set sail in 1310 for the North Equatorial Current, which from the west coast of Africa would lead straight to the Americas. Bakr had heard tales of an ancient African civilization across the Atlantic Ocean. Portuguese Muslims had brought back word of its existence from a voyage some 50 years earlier. They told of giant African heads of stone, whose history would later be traced back 1,500 years before the birth of Jesus.
There are elements of sculpture, as you know, in Mexico, which has so-called Negroid features, and we know the sculpture goes back 2,000 years. So obviously that sculpture must have had models long before Christopher Columbus.
Malian scribes and griots tell of two separate voyages. During the first, Abu Bakr sent a fleet of ships to explore the new land. They landed in the Gulf of Mexico, then sailed up what they called the Big River, which we assume was the Mississippi. The captain of his fleet returned to Timbuktu with invaluable charts of the voyage and what they had seen. King Abu Bakr soon assembled hundreds of vessels with trade goods and supplies for the new settlements, then set out on the second voyage across the Atlantic. Some settled in Brazil, Honduras, and along the Mexico coast near the Aztec civilization.
All the Muslims came to America even before Columbus. Muslims came to America in 13th century. So Muslims came to America even before Columbus came here. And some of the navigators with Columbus in his ship, they were also Muslims.
I've written about it with regard to UNESCO General History of Africa, that people from what was then the Mali Empire took off in order to cross the Atlantic. In Volume 8 of the UNESCO General History of Africa, of which I was editor, and one of the chapters included that discussion whether there were black sailors who crossed the Atlantic before Columbus.
Mansa Musa is mostly remembered for his extravagant Hajj to Mecca with 100 camel loads of gold. But during his pilgrimage, he brought back the components for an extensive Arabic library, religious scholars, and most importantly, the Muslim architect al-Sahili, who was to build the great mosque at Gao in Timbuktu. The Hajj and stories of Mandinkan explorations planted Mali in people's minds, and on this map, Mansa was shown as a richly attired monarch holding a large gold nugget in the area south of the Sahara. With Musa being a strong supporter of education, Sankore University began its collection of manuscripts and navigational charts, which would become vital to the 15th century seamen. Muslim navigators were in demand, and as many as 3 went to sea with Christopher Columbus. They provided a means of communication and ocean charts for his journey. A renowned American historian, Leo Weiner of Harvard University, wrote that Columbus was well aware of the Mandinka presence in the New World, and that the West African Muslims had spread throughout the Western Hemisphere. Columbus admitted in his papers that while his ship was sailing near Jabara on the northeast coast of Cuba, he saw a mosque on the top of a beautiful mountain. He told his son of a tribe of Muslim natives known as Al-Mami. In Mandinka and Arabic languages, Al-Mami was the designation of Al-Imam, the person who leads the prayer. There is extensive evidence that supports the idea of African Muslim contact with early Native Americans. They spread their language and exchanged products, leaving evidence of their encounters with the people of the New World. Hernando Cortez, the Spanish explorer, described the dress of the native women of the Aztecs as long-veiled, with the same design and cloth worn by the Moorish women of Granada. He wrote of handkerchiefs, headdresses, and loincloths that resembled the cloth that West African Muslims exported into Morocco, Spain, and Portugal. When Europeans began to immigrate to America, they found African tribes living on the land. Many of them had ties to the Moors, Mandinkans, and the Olmecs. The century which followed saw the breakdown of Timbuktu, when ships displaced caravans and slavers began to pillage the city. This practice of enslaving educated Muslims grew to gigantic proportions as students and scholars were taken from their mosque and homes by Portuguese and Moroccan slavers. From 1442 to 1700, millions of men, women, and children were kidnapped by European and Arab slavers, with many thought to be practicing Muslims. A striking example of Islamic presence in America during the 17th and 18th century are letters and documents which were written by Africans who were literate in Arabic. There are many stories of Muslims in early America, such as Yaro Mahmoud, who came from West Africa in the mid-1700s as a slave and died a free practicing Muslim at 128 years old. But for the most part, Islamic influences had a hard time surviving the slavery period. Africans that were brought to America were prohibited from speaking their native languages, which included Arabic. This had the effect of eliminating a common thread of communication shared by many of the slaves.
The slaves who were brought to America, most of them, 2/3 of them were Muslims. And they were even exchanging letters between them in Arabic. We call that Ajami. Ajami is using the Arabic letters to write letters. So that was in existence in Africa before the slavery.
The United States of America's shaky relationship with Muslims began during the very first days of the nation. American conflicts with Muslim states in North Africa provided the U.S. Marine Corps a theme song. The line from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli was in response to events surrounding a war at the start of the 19th century in Africa. Although the country was at war with Muslims abroad, the seed of Islam had been planted at home. There are two well-known American Muslim communities that arose during the early 19th century. In the state of Georgia, Bilali Muhammad, also known as Ben Ali, was the leader of a congregation. In 1829, he wrote a 13-page Arabic textbook regarding the laws of Islam and Islamic living. From 1816 to 1840, Salih Bilali was the trusted head slave manager of more than 450 Africans, many of them Muslims. It was reported by his owner's son that while Salih was on his deathbed, his last words were, "Allah is God and Muhammad is his prophet." Unlike other African Muslims, both were able to practice their faith freely. Scholars have cited that Brazil received more enslaved Muslims than anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere. It was reported that 200,000 Muslims lived along the Amazon River and on the Atlantic coast of Brazil. They were traced back to the Abu Bakr settlements through an Arabic codex, which included a copy of a handwritten Quran in the Mali style of Arabic dated sometime in the 14th century. During this time, the search for a better life brought a more serious Muslim to America. This marked the return of Quranic terms and practices that would re-energize the growth of Islam in the West.
I always tell the story of a Lebanese in 1900 who went to Beirut Harbor and wanted to board a ship bound for New York. When he asked the captain of the ship, "Do they have mosque in America?" The captain said no. He jumped off the boat. I always say that if this Lebanese knew that in less than 90 years, the lifetime of his children, there will be at least 1,500 masajids and Islamic centers in America, he would have come. If that Lebanese was given a vision by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that an American president will come to his neighborhood in Jordan and will be on television in Lebanon and Syria and all those areas there, telling them that in America, in my country, he's a Christian president, in my country, people say the azan 5 times a day. If that Lebanese was given a vision by Allah 90 years ago, he would have come. He didn't come. But other Lebanese came.
During the early 1900s, the first wave of Muslim immigrants came to America. A substantial number found themselves in a strange society with very few links to the Islamic world. Some continued their practice of the religion, while others fit into the American melting pot, but all were conscious of their heritage.
In 1904, my grandfather and grandmother left their native home in Jerusalem and came to Boston, to America. And in doing so, they in fact expanded my heritage. Till that point, if they had not made that migration, I would have been an Arab. But now, because they came here and because my father was born in Boston, I am an Arab American. I just ask you to think about how amazing it is that a president of the United States could have had an Arab American as a chief of staff.
As the language of the Quran was reintroduced to America, it seemed to motivate the return of Islamic thought. Albanian Muslims opened a mosque in Maine and later in Connecticut. In 1929, Muslim farmers had a place of worship at Ross, North Dakota. But what is considered to be the first building in North America to be designed exclusively as a mosque was constructed at Cedar Rapids Falls in Iowa. Built in 1934 by Lebanese immigrants, this community was very tightly knit. Going overseas to marry was common. Arabic was widely used. The financial base was strong, and only a few drifted from the religion. African Americans began to rediscover their heritage around this time. In 1913, Noble Drew Ali established the Moorish Science Temple of America in Newark, New Jersey. Born Timothy Drew in 1886, he traveled to Egypt, where he learned the messages of the Circle 7 Quran.
The Noble Drew Ali movement was very important in our evolutionary progress towards understanding the meaning of and having the desire for freedom, justice, and equality. Noble Drew Ali was a very important part of this evolutionary progress.
By 1928, Drew Ali had 15 temples with an active membership of over 100,000. He was the first to teach of Prophet Muhammad in the inner cities. In 1921, Dr. Mufti Muhammad Siddiq from India began to gather converts. He established the first headquarters of the Ahmadiyya Muslims and practiced a form of Islam. It was the only source of Islamic knowledge available to African Americans at that time. In the early 1920s, Duse Muhammad Ali, an Egyptian, and black nationalist Marcus Garvey broadened the concept of Africans in Islam. Ali taught the history of ancient Egypt and expanded the understanding of the Moorish Islamic empires. He was the first to profess the Moors were in America before Columbus in Garvey's newspaper, The Negro World. The movement established an organization in Detroit known as the Universal Islamic Society. In the 1930s, a basic concept of Islam began to find a receptive audience in America's urban centers. One of the greatest proponents among black people was an immigrant silk merchant named Wallace D. Farrard. He was an Orthodox Muslim from the Pakistani region of India who had been educated by the British.
He came to really attract poor, lost blacks who had no hope in their future in this country, who didn't believe that this society would ever give us respect. He came and he attracted them to join him so they can have their separate world, their separate nation.
Farrard introduced his new converts to Muslim prayer and proclaimed that the only way African Americans could get out of their condition was to submit to the will of Allah. In a 1933 interview on a radio show in Detroit that included Dr. Albert Einstein, noted scientist and human rights activist, Farrard spoke about awareness and sensitivity.
For years now, people who have attended my lectures have been asking me questions about my theory of religion, truth, Islam, Allah, etc., etc. But you see, Mr. Einstein, 95% of the population have made religion and truth something permanent. And is religion and truth permanent? If it is, then it is continuous. And what is continuous is not truth. That is the beauty of truth. It must be discovered from moment to moment.
Farad had built a strong argument highlighting American Christians' difficulties combating the effects of slavery and racism.
His plan was to attract the most illiterate of them, but to teach them to become educated, to teach them, give them a sense of greatness, divine greatness, so that in time their children will become better educated, and they would then look for help from sources that respected their intellects. And the only material he left back with us that respects our intellect, as it should be respected, is the Holy Book Quran, that he showed great respect for the Holy Book. The only picture they have of him is a picture of him looking piously at the Holy Book like this.
In 1931, a woman in Detroit named Clara Poole heard Farad speak. When she introduced him to her husband Elijah, together they would form an organization that would change the face of America forever.
Master Farad Muhammad gave him 104 books to study. And Elijah Muhammad said to me, the best of those books was the Holy Quran. And the other 103 all contained aspects of the life of Prophet Muhammad.
When Farad disappeared in 1934, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad assumed leadership.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was a very wise man, and though his teacher conceived the Nation of Islam, even the school, the University of Islam, all of that language, all of that was conceived by Farad Muhammad. But the emphasis on economics was just a hint in the teachings of Farad. The establishment of education was, I would say, a hint in the teachings of Farad, though he had, though he insisted that the members learn to read and write and their minds be excited, the intellect be excited for education or for higher knowledge. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was the one who established the Nation of Islam. He took it from little pamphlets and ideas and vagaries, and he had the courage to go out there and try it, and he established business and all that.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Elijah Muhammad, that preacher of freedom, justice, and equality. To you, my black brother and sisters.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Muhammad is the most informed newspaper ever. Here you are, my brother. Stick your paper together. It's only 50 cents, brother. One small nickel and a dime for your own. Pardon me, brother. You heard this is Muhammad speaking.
Elijah Muhammad began implementing their plan for organizing a community of Muslims. The black religious themes, unique language, and self-improvement aspects were inspiring and attracted many people to the Nation of Islam. Black communities were introduced to an alternative to Christianity and became familiar with Muslim principles and beliefs.
When I was first introduced to the religion of Al-Islam, I was already in the church, and they had a meeting speaking about, one God, and speaking about that we was not Negroes and colored people and all this. We was just black men, coming from our homeland, brought here, didn't come on our own. So when soon as he asked all of those who would want to accept the religion to please stand, I popped up to my feet. A deacon of the church, chairman of the deacon board, jumped up into another religion within a few minutes and ready to give up something that I'd had ever since 1937 as a boy.
You can't find Negro in the Bible.
Right. He, the apostle.
You can't find the black man in the Bible that is respected by God himself. The way he's placed there and has been changed up by our enemies, it makes it impossible for you to find salvation for Negroes. It's impossible for you to find salvation in the Bible that you now read for Africans. I want you to listen there, it's good.
The Nation of Islam became one of the most significant organizations of the 20th century. It introduced hundreds of thousands of Americans into a new way of life. This effort, led by Elijah Muhammad, would usher in the beginning of the evolutionary process that would bring African American people into Orthodox Islam.
I came from the South looking for that was not, as you know, the southern states were segregated. I joined the Army when I was about 17 years old. I spent 6 years in the armed forces. I found segregation. When I was discharged, I didn't go back to where I was born. I went to Detroit. The day that I heard that the white man was the devil and the black man was God and all this other stuff, I said, this is it.
It was not just because he called the white man the devil. That was a play on a psychological term, saying that if you're not the devil, prove it, because the way that you have treated black people, no other people, no human being could treat another human being that way if he called himself a Christian or if he was a God-fearing man. Look at the great psychology that was there. He tested the morality of the religion that was professed to be founded by America. He tested the integrity and the morality of white people who say that they left Europe because they were oppressed and they wanted religious freedom. He began to bring about what had been the so-called basis for America, the religious foundation. He tested their inhumanity to black people by simply saying, if you cannot consider yourself a God figure when you are treating people like you devils.
During the 1950s, the converts to this movement became familiar faces in the cities of America as their message began to reach the people.
How could so few white people rule so many black people? This is the thing you should want to know. How could so few? The white man today will tell you that thousands of years ago, the black man in Africa was living in palaces. The black man in Africa was wearing silk. The black man in Africa was cooking and seasoning his food. The black man in Africa had mastered the arts and the sciences. He knew the course of the stars in the universe before the man up in Europe knew that the earth wasn't flat.
Born Malcolm Little, Malcolm X joined the Nation of Islam in 1952. He quickly rose to prominence in the hierarchy of the organization. His effectiveness in recruiting and organizing was a major factor in the growth of this movement. As minister at Temple No. 7 in New York, he traveled through the country, organizing communities and opening Muhammad's temples of Islam.
And you're ready to do something about it, aren't you? They charged Jesus with sedition. Didn't they do that? They said he was against Caesar. They said he was discriminating because he told his disciples, go not the way of the Gentiles, but rather go to the lost sheep. Go to the people who don't know who they are, who are lost from the knowledge of themselves, and who are strangers in a land that is not theirs. Go to those people. Go to the slaves. Go to the second-class citizens. Go to the ones who are suffering the brunt of Caesar's brutality. And if Jesus were here in America today, he wouldn't be going to the white man. The white man is the oppressor. He would be going to the oppressed. He would be going to the humble. He would be going to the lowly. He would be going to the rejected and the despised. He would be going to the so-called American Negro.
The concept of freedom, justice, and equality received valuable media attention with the conversion of one of the world's most visible figures. A young boxer named Cassius Clay had just won the World Heavyweight Championship. He became friends with Malcolm X, who convinced him to meet Elijah Muhammad. Soon after, the Nation of Islam introduced him as Muhammad Ali, and he became the most recognized African American to ever embrace Islam.
We believe in obeying the laws of the land. We are taught to obey the laws of the land as long as it don't conflict with our religious beliefs.
The impact of converts such as Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X gained African American Muslims international attention. Student groups from major universities began to take notice of what was happening in America.
One day I went to one of his rallies and he noted that I was different, little bit fairer color. So after he finished his talk, some of his aides came and said, you know, brothers, who are you? And we introduced ourselves as fellow Muslims, but from Egypt and Syria and Iraq. He said, all right, Brother Malcolm would like to talk to you. So he took us to him. And he engaged us and said, what do you think of what I said? What do you think of what I write? And I said, do you want my candid view, Malcolm? And he said, yes, of course. I said, I think you see Islam little different from us. He said, how is it? I said, well, you could see some of our fellow Muslims from Syria is as blonde as any lily white American. But he's a Muslim. And I'm a Muslim. And he is from Sudan, he's black, he's a Muslim. So Islam is not just black, and the white are not just devils. Please, revise your knowledge of the diversity of the Muslim world, and go to the pilgrimage so you can see for yourself.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
Upon his arrival in Saudi Arabia, Malcolm was treated like royalty. He was quoted heavily in the press and engaged by many scholars and dignitaries from throughout the Islamic world. He was surprised at the many races that made up Muslims.
When I was on the pilgrimage, I had close contact with Muslims whose skin would in America be classified as white, and with Muslims who themselves would be classified as white in America. But these particular Muslims didn't call themselves white. They looked upon themselves as human beings, as part of the human family, and therefore they looked upon all other segments of the human family as part of that same family. They had a different look or a different air or a different attitude than that which is reflected in the attitude of the man in America who calls himself white. So I said that if Islam had done that for them, perhaps if the white man in America would study Islam, perhaps it could do the same thing for him.
Upon his return from Saudi Arabia, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz was invited to speak at Oxford University.
But when a black man strikes back, he's an extremist. He's supposed to sit passively and have no feelings, be nonviolent, and love his enemy. No matter what kind of attack, be it verbal or otherwise, he's supposed to take it. But if he stands up and in any way tries to defend himself, then he's an extremist.
In July of 1964, Shabazz was invited to speak at the Organization of African Unity Conference on Human Rights in Cairo, Egypt. Although it was not as widely publicized, he had become heavily involved with international movements to rally against colonialism in Africa and domestic human rights abuses in America.
We think that the only way to get America, the racist element in America, to change their attitude is by bringing outside pressure and world pressure to bear.
Several Islamic leaders had offered the invitation, including Kwame Nkrumah, president of Ghana, Ahmed bin Bella, prime minister of Algeria, and Gamal Abdel Nasser, president of Egypt.
Are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that nations look, African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society.
By 1965, the civil rights movement had exploded, and the Vietnam War was raging. Muhammad Ali and many members of the Nation of Islam had refused military service based upon their religious belief.
Whatever the punishment, whatever the persecution is for standing up for my religious beliefs, even if it means facing machine gun fire that day, I will face it before denouncing Elijah Muhammad and the religion of Islam. I'm ready to die.
This position, which cost Ali his world championship title, would become a symbol for the civil rights, anti-war, and black power movements.
Why are we mistreated? Why are we in this condition, stripped of our name, our language, our culture, our God, and our religion? If I'm gonna die, I'll die now, right here fighting you. If I'm gonna die, you my enemy. My enemy is the white people, not Vietnam. You won't even stand up for me in America for my religious belief, and you want me to go somewhere and fight, but you won't even stand up for me here at home.
As young men in our 20s, the early 20s, we did not drink, we did not smoke, we did not lie, we did not steal. We were diligent, we were hard workers, and we were polite and courteous to our parents, and we were friends to neighbors, and we had no fear at all in our heart except to Almighty God, and to be obedient and love for ourselves and our own people the way we should. It was a different man. He walked in one way with his head bowed and full of fear, but when he came out fearless with a positive mind.
Brother Kareem, exactly what has Islam done for you, sir?
Well, unlike my brother, who is a convert to Islam, I grew up in the Nation of Islam ever since I was about 4 years old. When my father and my mother came into the nation, I didn't have the benefit of being pulled out of the pool hall or pulled out of off the street corner or out of the dope den or whatever the case may be. My father was pulled out of that, and he pulled me with him.
What has Islam done for you?
Well, you can look at me and see it. You can listen to me and hear it. You can feel me and sense it. It has given me life. It has given me a reason for existence. It has given me a purpose. I'm not before these cameras because I want to be seen. I'm before these cameras because the teaching of Islam has made me to love for my brother what I love for myself. And if I have found a new life that caused me to leave the filth and the mud of the white man's world and hold my head up high and to execute wisdom in my daily life, I want to share that with my brothers and sisters. When you look into my face and you see the brightness of my skin and the brightness of my eyes, you're looking at a product of the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad on how to eat to live. It doesn't make me feel good to share this good or to have this good teaching for myself. I feel that I must share it with all of my brothers and sisters that they may benefit from Islam as I have done. So what does Islam mean for me? Life itself. And without it, I would not care to live.
Born Louis Walcott, Minister Farrakhan came into prominence as everyone wondered if the Nation of Islam would survive the murder of Malcolm X. Minister Farrakhan and most Muslims supported Elijah Muhammad. Above all the uncertainties, the movement continued to grow stronger. From 1965 to 1975, the Nation of Islam's economic plan was put into full effect. they began selling bread, pastries, and bean pies from their bakeries. Muslims could be seen on any given day, on any given street, in any kind of weather, selling the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, which became the largest black publication in the country.
I remember in the cold of Buffalo, New York, it was so cold that you couldn't even, Muhammad Speaks was only 20 cents, and you couldn't sell it. People run you off the doorstep telling, I don't want that paper. You sell bean pies. Sister used to be so nice that they make bean soup and sell bean pies to the brothers when they come off of the field. Out there working hard trying to sell a paper, they come and have some good bean soup. Bean soup and them good muffins and a piece of bean pie, you can work all day long.
A strong group of ministers in each city became the front line for community relations and seeing that the programs were working. And the largest of those was the fish business.
In your neighborhood, or with your fish today. Hey, now we've got Shabbat's good food down in the ghetto, down in the ghetto.
The Nation of Islam had established relationships with international trading partners and began importing millions of pounds of fish.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad had made this deal with Japan, and we began to import the whiting fish from Japan. But when we tried to renegotiate our contract, they wanted to go up on the fish, on the whiting fish that we were selling, rather than come down on it. Our volume had increased, it doubled and tripled. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, okay, well, we'll go some other place and look for a better bargain. And that's when he sent people to Peru. In fact, we unloaded 7 shipments of fish from Peru right here in Los Angeles Harbor.
This effort, which had a significant impact on the U.S. economy, was met with resistance in some cities.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us, the black man, to stand up and be a man. And because we stand up and be a man, the white man don't like this. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad brought in Muhammad's imported fish from Peru. These trawlers was built by the German government, and the people who catch the fish is the Polish government. And the people we buy the fish from is the Peruvian government. So there's 3 countries involved, and America would like to be friends of these 3 countries.
The Nation of Islam's impact was reaching to the very core of African American communities. They began achieving a level of financial success and independence seldom seen in the urban centers of America. Their growth was incredible, and although their leader was much older now, his charities in the general African American community were strong as ever.
Muhammad Ali, when you came back from Zaire, you spoke, it was a very brief news clip on talking about the hospital that the messenger is trying to achieve in Chicago. Could you reflect on that, please?
Well, yes, we're working on a project. The 1 million black people on South Side Chicago and only 1,500 beds. 1 million and only not even 2,000 beds. Black people are dying from the results of this in white hospitals, having babies in cars, bleeding to death in waiting rooms because there are no doctors, because the hospital's too crowded. And 1 million people, if we all just got together and saved $1 a month, we could have a hospital. But this is not happening. This is not a reality as of yet. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is working with his followers, and we're doing all we can. I'm donating as much as I can. We have the land, and we want to start as soon as possible to build us a hospital. We need a couple of 100 hospitals for 40 million black people. Maybe we need a couple of million hospitals. Well, this is just a little thing to start if we can just get one.
As news of what the Nation of Islam was accomplishing reached the intellectual and business community, thousands came to see what they were advocating.
Time has come for all of us Muslims and non-Muslims, right, to recognize that together, only together, are we going to be able to accomplish our goal.
That's right.
In cities across America, their events would now draw many prominent members of the black community who no longer feared associating themselves with Muslims.
My guest is now Rock Peters, who is an actor and independent film producer. Why have you lent your support to this event, Mr. Peters?
Because it is high time that we fear not each other. We've all been trained, brainwashed in the business of singleness, and unity is the only thing that will help us achieve the goals we search to succeed with.
What you see is a sign of the growth everywhere in America. In New York City, in May, we had the largest gathering of black people who came out to hear a word from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. 70,000 black people on a cold day in May came to hear the words of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Just last Sunday before last, 40,000 came out to hear the word of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in New York. And this is happening in Washington, in Baltimore, in Philadelphia, in Boston, Massachusetts, in Atlanta, Georgia, in Chicago, in Cleveland, in San Francisco. This is going on all over the country.
The year was 1975. The Nation of Islam had reached its peak of membership. No religious group had ever grown so quickly. However, a major change was about to occur. Elijah Muhammad died, and a new religious leader was introduced, one with the ability to translate and teach the Quran.
There's no strength on earth greater than God's strength. And what you see here today, my brothers and sisters, and when I say that, I mean all of you who have in your heart truth, decency, honesty, and love for God and righteousness. All of you, my brothers and sisters.
Here, a day after his father, and we all have had fathers, and many of our fathers, grandfathers have passed, and we know how we feel on the funeral day or the day after. But here, this not only was this his father, this was his leader, and this was the leader of everybody that he really knew, the community he knew, his family. And the day after his father passes, this man stands up before a community of people who are looking for God to come. You know, after Elijah Muhammad, they were thinking God was coming. We were thinking, I didn't say they, we were thinking God was coming. He stood up before a community of people and began to paint a vision, a picture of bringing us into the ummah of Prophet Muhammad, and not through the back door, but through the proper door. And then when we walk through the proper door, as we walk through the proper door, we come to find out that we're right in the middle of things.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad says the one that come after me will be a new man. Say the one that succeeds Master Farad will be a new man. Saying he will do all things in accordance with his own knowledge. Say he won't accept anything of the old. Say he'll change everything and build a totally new world. Is that right?
Born Wallace D. Muhammad, W. Dean Muhammad was elected to leadership after the death of his father. A student of Arabic and the Quran, his views on a broader concept of the religion of Islam were welcomed by most members of the community.
Well, I was kind of like prepared for him to come. See, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad always taught us that someone would come after him. He was just introducing us. He was just waking us up. And if you notice his teaching, it was kind of like a wake-up.
I felt good because I knew he would be the one who would be the leader after his father, because it was already taught. There was so many hints about it that one day he was going to be a great help to his father. And we, many of us who knew this, knew that it was no one else to take that responsibility after the death of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad but his son, Imam Wallace D. Muhammad, who was known then as Wallace.
This is the first news conference held in the western part of America by Imam Wallace D. Muhammad since he assumed leadership of the Nation of Islam, now known as the World Community of Al-Islam in the West. Recently, you were visited in Chicago by the Undersecretary of the World Muslim League of Mecca, Saudi Arabia. I believe you were invited with a contingent of over 300 Muslims to visit Mecca.
Yeah.
Does this in any way signal closer ties or a closer relationship with Mecca, Saudi Arabia, and the rest of the Muslim world?
Yes. We now enjoy excellent relations with the Muslim world, with Saudi Arabia, with Sheikh Harkan, who's the president now of the World Muslim League, and with Sheikh bin Baz, who is the leading sheikh in Saudi Arabia, and with all the Muslim centers.
What accommodations would you make for that delegation of 300 or more that will go with you
Yes.
there to Saudi Arabia?
Well, as an expression of their happiness over us coming into what they call Sunni Islam, which means that we have now clearly declared ourselves to be not only Muslims, but followers of the Quran and followers of Prophet Muhammad. They have shown their happiness over that decision by giving us free land accommodations.
Can you give us an idea as to the growth of your particular religious movement in the West, how large it has grown, what your numbers are specifically?
Well, during the first year, of my leadership, that is during the year 1975 and early 76, we noticed almost, there was a 100% increase in the membership during those years.
What are we talking about in terms of?
During that year. In terms of numbers, I would say it's well over 1.5 million.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
Now called the World Community of Al-Islam in the West, W.D. Muhammad converted almost 2 million followers to Orthodox Islam. This incredible transformation directly led to the presence of an astonishing 300 mosques located in every major city in the United States.
مالك يوم الدين.
He insisted that members observe the 5 pillars of Islam. They began fasting during the month of Ramadan, and those who could afford it were encouraged to go on their annual pilgrimage to Mecca for Hajj.
When I became the imam in Cleveland, I didn't even know how to lead Jummah. First thing was to try to learn surahs of the Quran by heart and learning Al-Fatiha by heart. It was a lot of study, a lot of tapes to be listened to, and my greatest help was Imam Muhammad. He put about 5 surahs of Quran on a tape, and he did it real slow for me, and then a little faster, and then real fast, and said, you can catch it real quick like that. And that's how I really got started. And it was a struggle. I mean, a terrible struggle, a lot of work. And you had to stay up day and night trying to get this. But one day, when I went out, when the band was called, and I was the one to step out to do Jummah, I got a nice round of applause, and that gave me strength, and it was very nice.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad first he hired a Palestinian teacher to teach us Arabic. Later he hired African American who was half Moroccan and half African American to teach us Arabic. And finally he got a professor by the name of Jamil Diab to teach us Arabic. That put myself and Akbar, my youngest brother, Akbar Muhammad, and other of our students who were in our class there, put us in a good situation to begin reading the Quran in the original language of Quran in Arabic. That had an effect of making me doubt some of the theology of the Nation of Islam.
And as a result, my studies increased in Quran and Arabic until finally I had to part with the theology of the Nation of Islam. The first words of the Quran, as we read it, are Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, then Alhamdulillahi. So we have two descriptions of God until now, right? Bismillahir Rahman, that's one description, Ar-Rahman. Rahim, two descriptions. Alhamdulillah, Rabb, third description. The third description in the Quran that we come upon, now we just began reading the Quran, is this one, Rabb. And it says Rabbul Alameen, Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Affected grammatically. That's how come it's Rabbi. Otherwise, speaking as a noun or subject, it would be Rabbu or Rabbun. You see? I'm not here to teach you Arabic. This is not an Arabic lesson session or workshop, whatever you want to call it. This is Quranic Arabic.
W.D. Muhammad's clear understanding of the broader universal concepts of Islam had him well prepared to lead a transformation from a race-based organization to a religious one. They began to advocate Islam as a way of life and found other Islamic communities waiting to embrace them.
Recently I heard the name of Muslim in this country, and that makes me happy because I believe any other religions, they have to have a chance to listen to what Muslims offer them.
What do you think about the fair as a whole?
Oh, it's very good because that's the first time I see so many Muslim people around me. And not only that, I see other people, American people, that they are not familiar to the Persian or some of the import things I have, like some of them.
Two Muslims who are from, one is from Algeria, and this is Saeed Mendoun, and Muhammad Alim, who is from Puerto Rico. How do you view this event?
I believe in the future, if all of the brothers, understanding about the Muslim religion, the impact is very, very important for overseas. Not for Algeria only, but for all Muslim country.
I was impressed very much by Wallace and about the easy way how he talks and about the Islam and the Muslim people. And I had very nice feeling about it, especially I am from Tunisia, North Africa, and we are all Muslims there, and we share the same feelings with our brothers here in the United States.
Known for years as a closed society, the doors were now open to people from every God-conscious walk of life.
We were not doing this 5 years ago.
Celebrities like Isabel Sanford and Roger Mosley, as well as political figures like Angela Davis, all came to support America's new Islamic movement. Genuine dialogue was finally established with the Christian and Jewish communities.
I was here as the president of the American Jewish Congress, and I think it was very important for there to be Jewish representation in something like this.
Today, I thought was a very meaningful talk on bringing people together of all races, all religions, all creeds. It was a moving hour. And I couldn't help but think this morning that when I went to church, I belong to the Inglewood Church of Christ, and the preacher said today that every man is my brother. Then I came down this afternoon to the sports arena and virtually heard the same talk, that love is the most moving force that there is.
While many believed in the new direction, some members felt the work of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was not completed.
He's not a learned man. He's not a college graduate of the people.
Minister Louis Farrakhan, who supported the new leadership, had become a pillar of the community. But secretly, he struggled with Imam Muhammad's direction. So in 1978, he left the organization to resurrect the Nation of Islam and its do-for-self approach, leaving the spiritual aspects to Imam Muhammad.
Even though Elijah Muhammad did more for us than any man that ever lived, you deny him because you don't think nothing of yourself.
I'm looking in the future with a new mind. And I know that America needs leadership. And I'm going to make my contribution. And I believe that there are people who have enough sense left in them to see the promising direction that we are giving or offering in the community.
The community continued to develop its earnest devotion to the religion of Al-Islam. They began an unprecedented propagation of Islam in America, and their national newspaper was their single largest tool. Formerly called Muhammad Speaks, it evolved through the community's transition into the country's largest Islamic newspaper.
Well, you know, the first decade after Imam W.D. Muhammad's leadership from the Nation of Islam to the community under his leadership, we spent a lot of time with the Muslim Journal in correcting the past history from the old Nation of Islam days in terms of what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught as theology and in his reverse psychology that he got from Farad Muhammad and what that meant to our community as a social reformer. So we spent a lot of time, about 10 years, covering the past history and bringing it up to date and explaining why we were there and what it meant for us and where we are coming to. And we are coming into the era now where we need to branch out and truly represent the Muslim community that's represented worldwide.
The next area of significant growth was with their national school. It had become the nation's largest Islamic educational system.
We know about the word motive. We've heard our motive, what motive means. As a Muslim, your intentions, your motive and your intention. A Muslim, when you ask for prayers and check your du'as, and you ask for prayers, and if you don't make things, you mean well, and it doesn't come across well, then it goes out, Allah goes on our intentions.
With classes in Arabic and daily prayers, its academics would rate with the finest in the country.
Claire Muhammad School are a concept and a reality. We've made such progress that the directive testing says that the scores of the Claire Muhammad School in Oakland are a bright spot in the educational system of Oakland. So what does that say about what Claire Muhammad School and those in the Association of Imam W.D. Muhammad have been able to accomplish in this short period of time with a limited amount of resources? I mean, it's nothing short of miraculous.
My child is a product of the Claire Muhammad Schools. My son graduated with high honors from college. He is now a vice president of one of the major financial institutions in the country. It has worked very well for him, but what has worked even better is that he is a moral human being, and he's a good person in the society.
Schools are even more important than masajid at the moment. We can pray and have salah and worship in any clean place. However, we need schools to ensure that our children and our neighbors' children and our neighborhood have a place that cares for children, that provides them nurturing, loving environment, and that ensures that they are learning and getting what they are entitled to get.
In 1965, the Immigration Act was passed. In a surprise to U.S. expectations, it led to a huge influx of people from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Islam was one of the great beneficiaries, as a substantial number of Muslims came in search of higher education and better professional opportunities. They began building mosques, schools, and communities that would forever change the landscape of America.
We had a clear vision that we expressed as Muslim American identity. So I am of Egyptian roots, but I am an American who is a Muslim. And so if someone from Pakistan, he have his roots, but we coined the term that home is where my grandchildren are being brought up, not where my grandparents are buried. Where my grandparents are buried, this is my roots, which I cherish. But home is America. And so now there should be, like there is an Egyptian Muslim identity, there is a Korean Muslim identity, there must be an American Muslim identity.
As the landscape of America continued to evolve, so did the relationship between indigenous Muslims and Islamic countries. Members of the royal Saudi Arabian family, including Prince Abdullah and Prince Mohammed, announced their first business venture with American Muslims.
As you know, the first African Arabian corporation is a multinational corporation controlled by private interest business in Saudi Arabia to develop business and trade throughout the world. We have established offices in the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the United States.
Attorney Khalid Al-Mansour, a successful American businessman who represented the Saudi group, offered details on a partnership with Muhammad Ali.
And as Prince Abdullah has said, by establishing offices throughout the world, the United States and Latin America and Japan and Korea and Taiwan and Canada and England and Saudi Arabia as well as Africa, we are able to find out from these different areas what it is that those countries need.
People ask me all the time, what are you going to do when you finish boxing? This is a good question. It's a hard question. I'm still debating over what do I want to do because I'm offered so many things. Ministry, sports announcers, many things I could do. In my travels throughout the world, after becoming a Muslim, accepting the name of Muhammad Ali from the late great Elijah Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, has made me the most popular human being on earth. And in the short lifetime that we have here, and been offered so many deals and arrangements and positions, occupations, it's confusing on what do I want to do with my life. So today is the first step.
Support for the growth of Islam in America came from around the world. Kings, scholars, and many international diplomats came to see what they could do to assist. The Saudi Arabian government sent religious spokespersons and shipped large amounts of Qur'ans to educate indigenous Muslims on the tenets of the religion.
It's a great pleasure for me personally, but also it's an honor that I thank you very much for giving me and my colleagues and brothers the opportunity to participate with you in this great occasion.
In August of 1990, the United States of America returned to war with an Islamic country for the first time in nearly 200 years. The Gulf War, which lasted less than a year, presented the first opportunity for Muslims in America to demonstrate their value to the country. Imam Muhammad and a special delegation went to Saudi Arabia, where he met with high officials in the royal family and was asked to be a spokesman during the Gulf War, addressing the presence of U.S. troops so close to the holiest place of Islam, the Kaaba.
The Saudis have been quite explicit in allowing in the infidel forces, quite explicit in saying that yes, you can come in, but as soon as the job is done, get out. Now you're a Muslim, but you're also an American. How do you feel about that?
Well, I haven't read it that way. I think what the kingdom is saying is that you're here and we appreciate you here. Being here, we need you here. But this is a great problem for Islamic people of the world. This place is a place of sacred devotion to the sacred rites of our religion, and it causes a conflict here, and it's not good for the atmosphere here to have soldiers present here. Whether they're from America or any place, I think they would feel the same.
Upon Imam Muhammad's return to America, his status as the leader of Muslims in America was firmly cemented as he was invited to speak before the United States Senate and other legislative bodies.
Bless the efforts of the President and all other efforts in progress for more jobs and opportunity, more opportunity to be in this great society for more of us. Bless matrimony and families here and all around the world. Increase for the President of the United States, for every member of the Senate, and for every member of the House of Representatives, the excellence of man's spirit and the excellence of the intellect of the statesman, so that they may build a better America for us all. Amen.
Amen. This is a great day for the United States Senate and for our country to have Imam Wallace Muhammad here with us today, the first Muslim to pray in the United States Senate. We couldn't have made a better choice. There isn't a better man in America or a better religious leader who is trying to do what's right for his people.
As the relationship between Muslims in America and abroad continued to blossom, Islamic countries began to show trust in their American brothers. Minister Louis Farrakhan, who had developed strong relationships with the Muslim world, helped Jesse Jackson get a U.S. naval flyer from Syria and had many behind-the-scenes efforts in sensitive negotiations with Islamic states. When he organized the Million Man March, which drew nearly 2 million people to Washington, D.C., he proved the power and influence of Muslim leadership in America.
I greet all of you, my dear and wonderful brothers, with the greeting words of peace. We say it in the Arabic language, Assalamu alaikum.
Religiously, however, Minister Farrakhan continued to answer questions about W.D. Farad.
Master Farad Muhammad told us to accept our own and to be ourselves. We know that he, a human being born February 26, 1877, is not the originator of the heavens and the earth. But the good that we gained from his 3 years and 4 months among us was that he raised from among us a man that would get us started in a process that even though the Islamic world would have liked to have helped us, and many Muslims came to try to help us, they didn't have the right methodology and approach for the condition that we were in.
When you examine the variety of Islamic experiences in America during the last quarter of the 20th century, you see a distinct pattern of religious growth. However, to gain a keen understanding of why Islam emerged as such a dynamic force in America, you must examine the parallel events of the Islamic world. In 1979, less than 5 years after African-American Muslims made their historic conversion, huge events began to unfold in the Islamic world. On November 4th, radical students in Iran seized the United States Embassy complex in Tehran. The crisis that followed this seizure created an Islamist movement that would prove to influence American history for years to come. Less than a year after the hostages were released, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, who had been forced to brutally crack down on more than 1,500 Islamists in Egypt, was assassinated by a group with ties to Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, a cleric later convicted in the U.S. for his role in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. However, it was barely a memory when in 1983, American Muslims woke up to the headlines that nearly 300 U.S. soldiers had been killed by an explosion in Beirut, a suicide bomber.
People need to understand, we misunderstood the word jihad. We misunderstood the way the jihad was applied and how it should be applied. The problem of the Muslim world really is a politics. And the politics is so diabolical. Politics which is really dealing with the Palestine-Israel conflict. Until that conflict is resolved, some Muslims will go to behaving like they don't have their heads screwed right.
The chain of events that were quickly unfolding in the Islamic world began to mold the thought process of Muslims in America. It also let African American converts who were still new to this religion know that they were on a special path in their Islamic growth. In the 1990s, Islamist conflicts erupted around the world. A series of terrorist attacks were launched against Africa, France, and the U.S. In the eyes of many, the root cause of this turmoil was the occupation of Palestine by the Israeli army. Palestinian President Yasser Arafat reached out to Muslims in America for help in resolving the conflict, which had cost thousands of lives. Imam W. Deen Muhammad led a group of diplomats who received a warm reception everywhere they went. The accounts were published and televised to an amazed American audience.
Dozens of news people, U.S. networks, and Palestinian, Israeli, European television, radio, and print media packed the large interview room.
Quite regretful, it was disturbing that the peace process has to be stopped. Because right now I don't think there's any progress for the peace talks. So this is what disturbs the White House, the State Department, for us in the U.S.
Everywhere he went in Jerusalem after his talk in Masjid al-Aqsa, people were stopping him, shaking his hand, embracing him, and kissing him. They kept saying, "Help us, Imam. Let the world know what is happening here."
During the decade of the 90s, the growth of Muslims in America was phenomenal, with the population more than doubling through that period. Islam became the fastest growing religion in the Western Hemisphere, with an astonishing 1,500 mosques being opened across the United States. Perhaps the most amazing part of this growth was its ethnic makeup. Although at one time African Americans made up the majority of the Muslim population in the U.S., the influx of Muslim immigrants from around the world had turned the Islamic community into a brilliant new spectrum. No other country in the world could boast this Muslim diversity.
Muslims of America represent almost every race, every color, every language group that you can think of. Here you have 60, 70 different ethnic groups This is the beauty of Islam. This is how Islam is, and they are all here. Some came long time ago, some came against their will, some came by their will, by their own choice, but they are all here.
Huge contributions were given to projects that furthered the growth of Muslims in America. Some of the Islamic world's most respected religious leaders and scholars, including imams from the two holy mosques in Mecca and Medina, came to America in support of its emerging Islamic movement. Prince Abdulaziz came to an elaborate grand opening ceremony for the King Fahad Mosque, built by his father.
Well, on behalf of Governor Pete Wilson, it is a great honor to be here to welcome His Royal Highness back to California on this special day.
Today, we are opening this great mosque, which we are all here under its purity, and which most Muslims hoped to get such a great mosque.
Relations between the Islamic world and Muslims in America reached its peak of interaction during the decade of the 90s. Not only were leaders and scholars visiting America in record numbers, Muslim American leaders were also being requested more than ever abroad. The Islamic country of Malaysia invited American Muslims to visit and discuss ways to improve their business relationship. A special delegation visited their nation's industries to explore business opportunities between the two.
Look at the Cubans in Miami. Look at the Koreans in Los Angeles. The Chinese in San Francisco. The Vietnamese in San Jose. The Mormons have a whole state that's called Utah.
As the growth explosion continued, the Muslim American community really began to make their presence felt. No longer were Muslims in the closet. In cities across the nation, the influence of Islam was entrenching itself deeper and deeper into the very fabric of American life. In Mississippi, an entire town was named New Medina, after the name of one of Islam's holiest cities in Saudi Arabia. It seemed as if an entire new culture was being born in America.
There's no movement in America larger than this. There's more Muslim business in America than there has ever been. There's more Islamic involvement by American Muslims than there have ever been. Where before the police department used to lock us up, now they call us and ask for our help. The ministerial alliances be looking for Islamic leadership. Imam, will you come and join? Imam, will you lead and guide? Imam, will you share some of this wisdom with us? The schools are looking for Muslim students because they know the character is there, but they also know the intent and the interest and the spirit of pursuing excellence is also in them.
This is Zarina Muhammad. Zarina participated in the Quranic recitation workshop here at the 1998 Islamic Convention. Zarina, how did your Quranic recitation piece go?
Good.
Now, would you like to recite Quran for us now?
Yeah.
Okay. Ready when you are.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها المزمل.
Not only was the community growing in numbers, but in its understanding of Arabic and the Islamic faith.
We are Muslims in a non-Muslim world. It is predominantly non-Muslim. We are Muslims with a mission, and that mission is to teach, practice, live Islam in America. And to do it with a double interest. To present the best to each other so that we become mirrors for each other and supports for each other, cooperate with each other, and on the other hand, to do it so that we attract the attention of the many, of the majority, of the citizens of this country to us that are not Muslim.
It's a really wonderful time to be alive. It's just a wonderful time and such a blessed time to have at our own disposal a vehicle, an inspired leader and opportunity for us to really achieve so many wonderful things. So we want to be able to open up the forum a little wider and begin to address some of those concerns.
Allahu Akbar.
The size of many gatherings was remarkable. Never in the history of America had a new religious movement grew so quickly. With America being a predominantly Christian nation, it was very important for American Muslims to maintain strong interfaith relationships, and maintain them they did. In fact, it became commonplace to see members of the Christian and Jewish communities at many of their conventions, not only as attendants, but as participants.
I have been given the gift of vision, and I see into the future that this group gathered here together today is going to increase in power and influence to bring peace and prosperity to America and to the world. And I count it a great, great honor that you would invite me to share in this your happy celebration.
The interfaith efforts of American Muslims did not go unnoticed. Imam W. Deen Muhammad was appointed president of the World Conference on Religion and Peace. During his tenure, he would make an unprecedented trip to Israel and meet with the world's top religious leaders. Later, he would also take a historic journey to the Vatican. No other American Muslim had ever set foot in this legendary city. Imam Muhammad would lead an entire Muslim delegation there and culminate the trip by meeting with Pope John Paul II.
As I approached him, I saw the great warmth in his face.
Ho visto il calore nella sua faccia.
Yes, and I went with such a light burden.
E sono andato leggero.
I said to him,
ho detto a lui,
Chiara and I have a beautiful working relationship with each other.
Io e Chiara abbiamo una bellissima collaborazione di lavoro insieme.
Joining each other so we can have a better world.
E lavoriamo insieme in maniera di fare un mondo più bene, più buono.
For all.
Per tutti.
I said, so I asked His Holiness
Sua Santità
to bless our efforts.
Benedire I nostri sforzi.
He said he would. He said yes.
Sì.
As the 7th century of Muslim history in the Western Hemisphere closed, the awakening of an international Islamist movement was becoming a political issue. American Muslims were wondering why Islamic values were being replaced by desperate, un-Islamic actions. They began to speak out.
Where is there honor in suicide? Can we find it in the Quran? We as Muslims worldwide know the answer. Our Muslim world leadership must move out of its own comfort zone and stand up and denounce actions carried out by Muslims that violate every principle our Prophet stood for. Our Muslim world leaders must be the voice of justice and not just for us. We must not let Muslims with wounded psyches belittle our faith and its principles.
When America awakened on September 11, 2001, it was ushered into a new era of international relations. Reportedly, 19 hijackers from the Middle East attacked the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The United States responded by declaring a war on terrorism, launching an invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, while enacting the USA Patriot Act, which expanded law enforcement powers. One group in America would have a much more difficult problem than any other: Muslims.
Until 9/11, Muslims were really making inroads in almost everywhere. We have a respect. People look at Muslims and so on and so forth and say, wow, these are Muslims. All of a sudden, 9/11 came, pow, and wipe out all the work of 30 years Muslims have been working here. Imam Muhammad, to immigrants, to everybody, the Quran, the embassies, they destroy everything.
For those of us who experienced 9/11 in America, our hearts were heavy in two respects. One, because the senseless loss of innocent life. But then it was a double blow to us because in the process, the religion of al-Islam was blemished by the conduct of people who called themselves doing something in the name of Islam.
Jewish killer? Jewish killer? Jewish
In the aftermath of 9/11, many Muslims in America struggled to come to grips with the new political climate that swept across the country. Although African American Muslims who had already experienced the fight for civil rights seemed unaffected, the immigrant community began to see a side of America almost foreign to them. They began to face intense discrimination, racial profiling, and even physical violence in some cases. Political allies who had once identified with the Muslim community seemed to distance themselves. As for the U.S. government, it stopped international funding sources, which previously had been used for building mosques in Islamic schools. However, amid all this, something else happened along the way. An unprecedented awareness of Islam began to develop in America. For millions of Americans, the religion had finally come to the center stage of the 21st century.
Since 9/11, everybody in America has become aware of what the faith of Islam is. Before 9/11, Islam was exotic, but now Eid is actually celebrated in the White House. So I think 9/11, ironically, gave America a more clear understanding of Islam.
Still, the question remained, how could Muslims in America recapture the emotional intensity that had been built over the past 25 years.
After September 11 and even before September 11, there are a lot of efforts to exclude Muslims from mainstream America for political reason, for whatever. But we need to be aware of that. And the only way for us to counter all that effort is by engaging.
I think the issue here is that Muslims and Muslim scholars are...
As unlikely as it seems, Muslims in the United States have become the new voice of hope for the Islamic world and have fully embraced their American identity.
We are Americans, and this is a responsibility and a privilege. We have to make America the best, not by conformity, but by being constructive and critical, and try to, as Quran say, enjoin what is right and try to oppose what is wrong.
Islam in America is now here to stay, but what does its future hold? New generations of Muslims are now being born and raised in the United States. Moreover, they are showing a unique sense of entitlement that previous generations have lacked. Muslim student groups have become a powerful social and political force in every major university and college in America. These students are also being supported by professors of these institutions who are also Muslims and are providing scholarly research and discourse that is bridging the gap between ancient Islamic tradition and the 21st century.
People from different backgrounds, different historical times can look at the same scriptural passages, the same text, the same verses, and still come up with different kinds of interpretation depending on where they're located in their lives, who they're dealing with. We can, depending on our circumstances and depending on what we hold to be valuable now, forefront that ecumenical trend, because that's more in keeping with our times, that's more in keeping with our pluralist society now.
Many things happened in Middle Ages, many things happened in Dark Ages, but now we have the media, we have all the means of communications, and this gives the message of God chances for multiplying its effect in enlightenment and in bringing humanity together.
The long journey for the growth and establishment of Islam in America is one for the ages. Never has a story been filled with more mystery, intrigue, struggle, and sacrifice than that of the many Muslim pioneers who have shared this incredible vision. The same vision King Abu Bakr II had when he abdicated his throne in Mali to bring his Quran to America in the 14th century. The vision of African slaves who maintain their Islamic belief through threat of torture and death so that it may pass on to future generations. The vision of Noble Jew Ali, who began to rekindle the Islamic spirit of those African Americans through the Moorish Science Temple, along with Marcus Garvey, Dusi Muhammad Ali, and the Ahmadiyas. The incredible vision of those early Lebanese immigrants who built the first American mosque and had the courage to develop true Islamic communities in early 20th century America. And of course, the Nation of Islam, who told America that Allah was God and began a new movement that would forever change the country's religious landscape. However, history will likely record the single most important factor for the growth of Islam in America was the visionary leadership of Imam W. Deen Muhammad, who introduced millions of Americans to mainstream Islam.
And I know there are others that feel as I do. We trust God, we are going forward with God, with the Quran and Muhammad, and we don't fear the criticism of any criticizer.
In the Quran it says, O men, behold, we have created you all out of a male and a female, and have made you into nations and tribes so that you might come to know one another. Well, for the first time in history, the nations and tribes of the world are all living together at one time and in one place, and that place is America.
We are unique among the Muslims in different other parts of the world. Islam is a rainbow in America.
How ironic it must be that a country just over 200 years old that was established because of the need for Christian religious freedom would also become the world's focal point for the religion of Islam. Some might call this fate. Others might call it God's will. But whatever you call it, the symbiotic relationship between America and Muslims is truly remarkable. Even more amazing is that in the scope of world history, this is just the beginning. What will things look like in 100 years, or even 1,000 years from now? Only time will tell. What does stand undeniable is the incredible documentation and research that has been presented on the first 7 centuries of Muslims in America. As for the 8th, it is said in Islam, God is the best planner. So whatever the future holds, surely it will be best for all of humanity. For Muslim News Magazine, I'm Lon Mukat. Assalamu alaikum.
Signs don't punish me with brutality. Talk to me so you can